Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Midpoint Review. I am your host, AJ Tabando, and we've got a great show for you today. My guest is Jeremy Shaki, formerly the CEO of Lighthouse Labs, who recently turned 40, sold his company, and hiked Machu Picchu. We'll be talking about entering the 40 Club, exploring different paths to happiness, and unpacking some of the lessons he's collected up to this point that he'll be bringing along into the future. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Habit Coffee Club. If you're a coffee drinker like me, you know how important that first cup is in the morning. I personally am non-functional without it. The only thing worse than no cup of coffee in the morning is a bad cup of coffee. In a world of uncertainty, I need to know my coffee is going to taste good. Luckily, that's where Habit Coffee Club comes in. Its smooth, rich, full-bodied flavor hits every time. It's described as a diner roast, like the best cup of coffee you've ever had at your favorite classic diner spot. And it just tastes like really good coffee. The best part is if you're in Canada, you can sign up for a monthly subscription and get it delivered to your door, so you never run out of coffee again. Visit their website at www.habitcoffeeclub.com to order a bag or sign up for a subscription and use the promo code MIDPOINT at checkout for 20% off. That's www.habitcoffeeclub.com. All right, let's get to it. Welcome, everyone, to the Midpoint Review. Today we have an incredible guest, someone I've known for a number of years now, Jeremy Shaki. Many of you will know Jeremy as the CEO and co-founder of Lighthouse Labs, and more recently as the new CRO of Uvaro. But for those who really know him, he's known as a guy that just kind of talks too much. He told me to say that, but as a friend, I can attest this is actually true. So, Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, AJ. I feel like this format might be okay for it.
I think so. And you know what? As I just told you, I do have a big old edit button that I will use aggressively as needed in post. So
all my friends wish they had the same thing.
Right? Real life edit button. Okay, so Jeremy, for people who might not know you, tell our listeners a little bit about who you are.
Cool. I mean, I feel like with the topic and what we're looking at, I want to steer clear of like overly my professional version of who I am and what I've done. So I'm gonna try and figure out my intro. That's not, which is hard. Even that's hard. So I'm a 40-year-old guy. I have two lovely daughters. I have a wonderful wife. I live in Toronto. I like to tell people I'm 6'5" on video, but I am not.
Why?
And I come from a pretty wildly creative family, and yet I am not that creative. I'm not artistic. I'm a poli-sci grad, and I'm somebody who's kind of spent a good chunk of my life being a forward-thinking professional or careerist, trying to figure out how I'm going to gain that financial freedom moment, that moment where I get to choose how I want to live the rest of my life without the burden or worry about how I'm going to afford all the different things that I think I have to afford, which has been an interesting battle as I've kind of gone on and probably leans into all of this. But in general, pretty happy person, enjoy a wide variety of different things and kind of passionate towards purpose. I'm somebody who has regularly spent a lot of my life thinking about problems and how to solve problems that really solve something for the people and communities around me.
I love that. And shout out to the poli-sci grads out there that fell ass backwards into entrepreneurship and tech and are trying to figure out how to use those things for good. I love it when I find us. I think you touched on so many interesting things there, and that drive towards freedom and feeling like you need to get to a point where you can then do a whole bunch of stuff you want to do without the burdens of anything else. But you mentioned that you have entered the 40 Club this year. Welcome. The grass is greener. And that feels like a midpoint to me. Do you feel like you're at kind of the midpoint of something in life right now? And how is that unfolding for you?
Yeah, I'm actually, I think I'm trying to reframe it as a midpoint. Sometimes I feel like it's late in the weirdest way. Like that's my own stuff coming in. And, you know, I have to like remind myself of it. I think but 40 is it's a turning point. There's something very significantly changing in my whole mindset and how I want to approach things. There's a little bit more of an urgency to it all. for the first time in my life, because I think I've spent a good chunk of my life being young and a guy who people are just like, wow, you're so young for that thing. What potential you have. And I think that's changed. Nobody says
We're not the young
nobody says
overachievers
that.
anymore. We're just the
Yeah.
life regular achievers now.
Yeah. It's definitely a moment where I'm rethinking how I want the next chapter to go, more so than probably I ever have.
And so I think, I mean, there's so much power in having this moment of awareness to reflect on your choices in life with intention. I know, you mentioned urgency in how you're moving forward now. I think, and I want to get back to that, but I think it's also interesting that, I know when I was younger, there was so much urgency in the early days to get somewhere. And I didn't always know where I was trying to get to. I just knew I needed to move fast and keep up. And so I feel like there wasn't as much, there were guideposts, there were big senses of who I was, but I wouldn't necessarily say there was intention. It was just following what came up and see where it went. How do you think about? Sorry, what's that?
Just to add the small snippet of, I think that's why we all went into poli-sci.
Yes. The world is fucked up.
It's
I don't
kind
know
of
what to do. I'm just gonna try and learn for the sake of learning about it.
exactly. We came out with it actually probably something that was really valuable, but I think I went into poli-sci with a really not sure which way I want to go and which part. I just, I know I need to go to university, and I know I like thinking about this stuff, and I'm not qualified for law school yet.
Okay, so we all lived the same life in being 18 to 19 when we were making that choice. Good to know. So looking back kind of where you're at now, and thinking about how you want to move forward, do you look back on your life and sort of see any kind of big moments or big experiences that have guided you here, whether intentionally or not? And how, if at all, do you feel like they might be shaping where you're at today or where you might go in the future?
Yeah, so I've been honestly thinking about a lot about this. Obviously, AJ, just even you and I we're talking because I've been thinking about it, and you're somebody who was going through your own version of this, and found a spirit that kind of lined up with me and where I'm at, and but also where I came from a little bit. So I'd say, I mentioned coming from a creative family, and the first part of my life is ultimately very defined by watching people who know how to be happy with not very much, but people who are worldly and cultured and can, think about a lot of different things in the world, not kind of, they've moved around, they've done a lot, and they've maintained a level of spirit and happiness and passion that made me look at it all without artistic skills, without all of that, and go, okay, there are a lot of ways to be happy. The floor doesn't have to be low. Like, I can live without too much money. But the opposite side is I watched how many people in their lives and them gave up on different parts of what they would really like to pursue because money interfered with that. And that kind of impacted how they approached their life. So they didn't lose the happiness or the spirit when they didn't have it, but they also definitely forgoed a lot of good opportunity. And I also saw as a kid how much of a struggle it was for them with me as a child to think about how to give me the best opportunities and not let how they did their own things in their own life necessarily be the same standard that they did with me. And so going to camp or going to a private school versus a public school, or, all these things were these little moments that they handled with really impressive humility and comfort, and always about me and not making it about that. But I was perceptive enough to see it all. And I think that shaped a lot of how I decided I was going to kind of approach the first sets of years of my life. And I've definitely blocked out sets of years in my life. Like, when I was in CEGEP before university, I was like, okay, before I go to university, before I go this way, I have to be more intentional. I'm going to take a year off. I'm going to enjoy some time. But my year off had a little bit of travel, but it was actually mostly working a job and then having my own apartment, and then being able to show that I could live independently and being able to build myself up that way, so that by the time I went to university, which I stayed in the city, I had a choice between leaving and going and staying in the city. From that point, I stayed in the city and I had a job throughout. I've had a job since I've been 15 years old, never without. And I was one of the first people who left and lived in my own apartment. I was paying for my own travel. I was doing all those things myself, which made me feel like I was doing a really good job for my family. Like, they didn't have to worry about me, and everybody was worried about that year off. But then I did go to university and that wasn't a problem. And then the next one was while in university, I decided I was going to move to Toronto and I was going to start a career. And I had been in marketing a little bit while in university. I'd found this job. And so the next chunk was I don't want to be in marketing for the rest of my life, but I think this is a great skill between that and my sales skills that I just kind of have naturally developed. I'm going to do this for 5 years. I'm going to build a network in the biggest city in Canada. I'm going to understand through an agency lens how all types of companies do marketing as opposed to one. And at some point around the age of 28 to 30, I will make my next decision, you know? And that was it. And knowing that that was kind of the chunk I needed. And I was good at giving myself longer periods of time. So I did that for a few years. And again, during those 5 years, I think I I sacrificed
There you go.
a bunch of the things like that a lot of other people might have been been enjoying. I still traveled, I still partied, I maintained my youth and my energy of like, oh, you only have your 20s once. I don't have any regrets on that. But I definitely did less outdoor stuff. I definitely did less there was so many times where I would leave something early because I had work or I had to do the thing the next day. I told
You're
my
the responsible. You're that guy.
totally managed having a good time and responsibility that I think I
Yeah.
did pretty well, but I did all that. And I'd say then Lighthouse at around the 28-year mark, I had this opportunity that came to me. It was kind of out of the blue. It'd been things I'd been thinking about in education, but my best friend and he had a dev shop and he kind of brought Lighthouse to me. And I didn't know anything about tech. And that was like a next adventure. But the idea of starting a company, I felt like I had hit my floor. I was a director of my agency and I was like, I've hit a floor that if it doesn't work, I can come back. But it feels like something that would be good for me to drive to the next leg, which is like I knew I did not want to stay career step by step by step. And I hadn't really thought entrepreneurship for sure, but when it came, I just went like, cool, let's try it out. And all those and then that was 11 years. Boom. I told myself it would be 4 or 5 years, maybe less because I'd be unsuccessful. And instead it went 11 years and I was solving a problem I was so fascinated with, like training people as adults and how they can change, that's all I care about. I care about being able to change into different things, be able to do what I want. So I trained people so that they could make changes in their lives. It was great, but that was 11 years. And here I all of a sudden hit 40 and I just look back and that has shaped thing in terms of, well, that's one big journey to get to this point that was only supposed to be a little bit, instead of like an I made it moment, it was supposed to be an opportunity to reevaluate and go, now with certain things settled, what do I really want? And doing that after 40 is actually harder than I thought. I have kids, I have all these different things. And I was like, I just thought I'd be able to like stop and go, the world is yours. But it's a lot mentally. So I talked too much.
No,
That was like,
you warned me. But yeah, no, this is great. I mean, I think that is, as I'm listening to you, there's a couple things that I've coming up that I find really interesting. One is this sort of ongoing wrestling with balance, it sounds like. And it sounds like that kind of came about even in your earliest, like growing up. You talk about being in this environment where you were with people who, knew how to be happy without a lot of money, but also that you saw foregoing things as a result of money and figuring out how do you balance, that sounds like you kind of saw from an early age that money in and of itself does not equate happiness, but it can provide the conditions to find new levels of happiness potentially. And how do you kind of hold both of those things and make choices in your life that lead you down a road that leads to the best outcomes on both and maintains a balance so that you have space for both? Because, money is great, but if you don't have the time to use it to do the things that make you happy, like what's the point, right?
And you and I both worked in purpose-driven places. Like, the amount of different decisions you make that are not for money, right? Like the amount of integrity that takes to do some of the jobs that you and I have both done is to actually often go, what is good for the purpose of what we are driving? And that I believe that purpose, if done with high integrity, will ultimately lead to success and financial success. But not to make every decision about money is a mindset in and of itself.
It is. And then also to know that if you run out of money, like that's got real consequences too, right? And so you can't make those decisions based purely on just what's going to bring in the most revenue. But at the same time, you can't take your eye off that ball either because you've got mouths to feed, right? So it's interesting. I hear so much similarities in your journey up to this point and mine, and in the idea of taking on, every time you sort of take on a new opportunity or a new path in life, seeing it as a finite step, right? That it's a couple of years, and that its purpose isn't to necessarily push you up a chain or a ladder, but to help you learn, right? Like when you were saying I wanted to go into marketing and learn everything there was to learn about working in an agency, that reminds me so much of when I left school and went into politics, and had never seen myself as being, despite going to school for poli sci, like being a staffer was not my end game, but it was a great opportunity. But my goal going in was like, I'm going to be here for 4 to 5 years max, and I'm going to learn everything there is to know about working in politics, being a staffer, how this world actually works. So that struck me. And so as you were speaking, you've read some of the stuff that I've written. And one of the things when I was going through my own reflection last year on this moment in time was that, your first couple of decades of adulthood, you feel like you're climbing this mountain, right? You feel like you're just, every step, you're just trying to get higher up and higher up and higher up. But what I realized last year was that I wasn't actually climbing a mountain. What I was doing was packing my bag to be prepared to climb. And by packing my bag, it was gathering the lessons and the insights that I needed to be prepared for this next step. And so thinking about that, thinking about everything you just said around your experiences and what you've done, what are some of those lessons that you may have learned over the last 2 decades that you feel like are most relevant to carry with you on this next version or on this next adventure?
First of all, I love the analogy, and I think what you think is climbing a mountain versus what you think is packing a bag is a mindset in and of itself, and is something that, like, that reframing is probably just really, really helpful in how you look at the next set of years regardless. And I think that's kind of one of the learnings in all of this, is the reason I commit longer periods of time or longer chunks, but not too long. Like the 11 years at Lighthouse was not what was committed to mentally. And actually,
Right.
after 4 or 5 years, that became a challenge that I had to kind of think back, like what you said about learning. I had to create my own learnings in the last
Mm.
5 years to justify and validate why I was still doing what I was doing, because my natural self was like, oh, you're extending past the period where, for all the things you want to learn and to do what you want to do and to get ready to climb that mountain, for lack of better saying it, these are things that in this moment roll with those punches. So I think the first lesson is that there is a fine line between dealing, like, it's a mental game to deal with the ups and downs, I guess, of everything from the context of trying to make decisions. You don't want to make decisions on your downs. You don't want to quit something at the bottom, because that's probably the wrong time to make that call. You don't want to always be suckered in to loving what you're doing at the top, only to not realize that there's going to be potentially a come down from that, even if the come down isn't the success of it. The idea that you enjoy it, what it does for your life, like all these kind of things. And then there's always going to be these new pieces that enter, that however you've been planning or thinking, it will change, and it will ask you the question over and over of, is this what I want to continue doing? Like, for me personally, that test of, is this what I want to continue doing, happens all the time. And I think what I learned about myself in that journey is that I'm a pretty committed person, and that commitment actually has to be valued more and worth more in the next portion of my life than I have valued it in the first part. The idea that I can just make decisions, and I will just make decisions, and I've done a lot of them. I have cut things. I have just, like, stopped something in its tracks. I've been good with that, but that also comes at a cost, meaning the whole concept of what you want to do for any chunk of time is something to not take as lightly in this next version, which is that urgency that I was kind of saying. And that's the first time I have felt that. That's the lesson. I have stayed with things too long. You know,
That's really, I just want to jump in there because I think that's a really interesting thing that I can see coming up a lot, that is very tied like to this period of life, that really resonates. The idea that, that it has to, that you're not going to make decisions to jump into things quite as lightly as perhaps you might have when you were younger. And I think that and I wonder if there's a tie there to some of the things you were saying earlier about having a family now, having responsibilities, just having other dependencies, and so that the consequences of how you make decisions, and it doesn't even mean like, if I do something and I fail, but just like how I'm spending my time, right?
I think the how you spend your time is something you reflect on a lot more as you get, even though you think you're doing it the whole way. But
Right.
definitely that paradigm has changed for me in how I think about how I want to spend time, which the problem is, it's like, actually the best way to evaluate, to think about this is like when you go to a party and, you spend your whole life for going out at night. I'm in Montreal. Okay. There's late nights plenty. And in the late nights of plenty, the best times have come when you have not stopped at midnight and gone, ooh, should I go home? Right? Like you don't even stop to think about it. You just go, okay, I'm going to continue on. I'm not going to evaluate how my night has gone so far. I'm not going to evaluate what it's worth tomorrow. I'm just going to keep going, and that commitment to it. So some of the best things come. Also, some of your biggest wastes of time.
Yes, yes.
And then
Thinking
you
about
have
some of my 3 a.m. decisions over the past couple decades that were not wise.
totally. And then yet, as you get kind of like, as you get older, maybe you start evaluating that more, and you actually cut out some of the best things that, like, once you start measuring anything, once you start like going, is this worth it? Is this worth it? You actually cut out the highs of that thing that really drive it in the first place by risk mitigating against the lows. Oh, I have this thing to do tomorrow. Oh, I always want to be fresh. Oh, I have kids. I have a responsibility. I should go home. And so you kind of cut out some of the stuff that actually made it the best. And now if you're not going to do that, what's the point? And I guess what I find myself really trying to balance as I hit 40 is, like, on one hand being like, okay, evaluate how you use your time. It's important. But you can't get into a place where you're constantly measuring and worrying about how you spend your time, because actually you will cut out all the potential things that come your way just by going with whatever comes in your direction. And that freedom to choose, but also to experience longer periods of time where you don't know where you're necessarily going or what you're doing, is actually one of the biggest freedoms. So for me, that's what maybe too complicated, but when I went to this year for my 40th birthday, instead of having a party with a bunch of people, and I went to Peru on my own for 9 days. And I went to Peru for 9 days, and I planned very little, and this was not supposed to be an epic trip. I went to Machu Picchu. That was really cool. I did a few things, but honestly, the day to day of having nothing that I had to do was the new luxury in my life. But sometimes you get bored and you're like, oh my God, should I have planned more? Should I have done
Am I
more?
wasting time?
My stupid brain. Like, my
Yeah.
stupid brain can't just stop questioning my own choices, but giving yourself space and time to not evaluate and, like, actually just take a moment. And that's what I actually felt in the past 10 years. What I felt in the past 10 years is I'd taken on so much responsibility, so much of my value was that I felt I was giving to people was built in this, like, let me help, let me figure out, let me think, like taking on different problems, different people's problems. How do I sort that out? How do I make this all work? That you get into this, like, logistics planning. How do I plan my calendar to the minute? How do I do all of that efficiency thing? And I don't think that efficiency thing drives anything to do with my happiness. If we only have 4,000 weeks to live, for whatever that number is, it's planning to try to fit in everything is way worse than planning a few couple buckets that you're aiming towards, and then just letting your life kind of move. That's my new version of what kind of matters in this moment.
I love that. I think efficiency is, I think there's a trap in there, right? That we don't always see because it makes a lot of logical sense, right? Trying to plan things. Whew, so much. I think,
Sorry.
no, I love it. This is it. These are the questions. This is the midpoint review. This is what we're doing, right? And I think everyone listening is probably resonating with this because this is what this moment of life is like. And I think that for so many of us growing up, and maybe this is a good chance to sort of pull this conversation up a level, because what's really interesting is I think, everybody goes through midlife, millennials and our generation, like we're not the first people to hit this stage of life and start to reevaluate things. But I do think what's really interesting and unique about people going through this moment now is that it's not just looking at my life and what have I accomplished, and have I accomplished the things I want, and do I want to live a different version of my life? But there's also this recognition that a lot of the rules that we were taught to live by, a lot of the sort of the playbook for success, the milestones we're expected to hit, they have dramatically changed, if not disappeared, in the last 20 years. The idea of, just keep your head down, work super hard, and like all the things will happen according to plan for you. It's worked out for some of us, like you and I have achieved certain success for sure, but for lots of people it hasn't, right? This idea of just be super productive all the time and you'll achieve the things that will make you happy. I think a lot of people are waking up to that, being like, what am I racing for? What am I hustling for?
Yeah,
And do I even want the things that I'm not even sure why I'm doing this? And when I get clarity on why I might be doing it, I'm not sure I want the stuff that I win at the end of this race. Right. And I
great
think
one.
that the idea of space and time is powerful for two things. One, it's kind of a radical thing to do, right? To say, in a world that is so focused on productivity and efficiency and, valuing you through what you create and what you do and how much you accomplish, just saying, you know what, like, yeah, I'm going to do some stuff, but I'm going to do it on my time. I'm going to sometimes do nothing, and there's value in doing nothing. There's no such thing as wasted time. Like, that's a very powerful just statement of resistance. And everyone who knows me knows I'm a big fan of the book Rest is Resistance by Trisha Hersey. If you haven't read it, you should. But she talks a lot about that, right? But then to the other point of creating the space for things to unfold for you and to have space to ask big questions and then space to think about it. Because, so often, like, these are big, heavy questions to ask yourself. And if you're so focused on just doing and doing and doing, you don't have the time to really sit and answer them. You're going to come up with the easiest, quickest answer because you're just going to move on to the next thing on your to-do list, right?
Totally.
Um, and so all of that to say, we are hitting these moments in a world that is changing. The world is very different than the world the generation before us had, the world that we even had 10, 15 years ago. How do you pull those things together? How do you see, changing? How does that change, knowing that there might not be any rules anymore because they are not working, so we have to write a new set of rules? How does that play into how you're experiencing this moment and how you're thinking about the future?
You just said a lot there that, like, I think the funny thing about talking about all of this, I guess, is I'm right at the beginning of it. And so everything, the first thing is I have to decide which narratives are the ones I believe in versus which is the ones that I even say, and like I'm still there. Like I don't know that I have a lot of conviction when you say like rest is what was the statement? Rest is peace.
Resistance?
Rest is resistance. Thank you.
Mhm.
Right. Rest is resistance. That's a hard one. Like
Mhm.
and I think it's right. I do believe it because every time I've had space, even like rest, or I've taken, a weekend, even in my deep work, like the concept of deep work, even like just this idea that deep work is not an hour, that it's a couple days, and that it's real space to think and to not do something before I do it. And it's not procrastination, and to not yell at myself that I'm wasting time, and that to know that you don't know the answer and it's okay to not do something for a little bit while you don't know the answer and to come back to it and clear your mind, and how important your body and mind are, what you need. You have to take responsibility for what you need to be your best, and that no matter what the constraints are, you can exist in a world where you are not your best. And if you're good, you can still be good. But internally, and your best, if you're not putting out your best, eventually you will be frustrated with it. You will be disappointed in yourself by not putting out your best. And so as the world is changing and like everything around us is changing, I think the biggest thing is not buying my own bullshit. I think it's building the habits of like, okay, the narratives that you tell yourself, you're a great salesperson to everybody, including yourself, and you can narrate any new period as whatever you want to call it. But you kind of got to take that seriously and not allow it to become something that you follow a path for a couple of years that then when you look back, you're like, I knew that was maybe not going to be the way it was, oh, things will change in a couple of years if I just have to get through this period and then that'll be fine. No, it doesn't work like that. The habits are the habits. Taking care of yourself is really important, especially I see that with kids. I hit my first limit. I hit my first ceiling of responsibilities. Like I was like, oh my God, how do prime ministers do this? I thought I could be anything, anywhere. And I was like, oh my God, am I crumbling just with
Right.
2 children and an okay business, like a business that's like not world beating. It's not, whatever. And I was like, whoa, what's up? Like I've never dealt with that, which is a learning. So I can craft it as learning, but it's tough. So when the world is changing around, I think for me, it's being very open-minded. It's saying what parts keep you with the most energy possible to approach the new things you are hearing and learning, and to have the ability to not get overwhelmed with them or not check in with all these different parts. Like, I'm sure macroeconomics are changing, AI is changing the way we work, people are feeling unsettled. The human beings in my life are all turning 40, which means everybody's going through their own thing. People's relationships, the dynamics with people are adjusting. Partnerships are being called partnerships as opposed to like, hot sex, love, romance all the time. Like, it's like there's just all these different versions of things that you talk about with people that's like actually like a change that doesn't always sound like it's for the better. And yet you're like, well, I'm definitely not going to spend my next 40 years being like I'm on a decline.
Mm,
Like that's not how I'm going to spend my next 40 years.
yeah.
Journeys are important. The balance of life is important. Whatever you want to enjoy in your moment is like, there are so many things to enjoy in your moment. And how do you rescope this to enjoy it during all this change? You ask that question. And I think the answer, honestly, is what little things, if you are not taking care of yourself in the way that is real for you to be good on a day-to-day basis,
Mhm.
you're probably foregoing, like everything else is just stimulation that turns it negative.
Mm.
If you are in a good place, your curiosity, your willingness to adjust, and your ability to handle with patience and energy the things that don't work out and see that as positive is there. And I think that's, if you can't handle the change, you are going to have a really rough time over the next while.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's so bang on. And I think, as a generation that has constantly lived in a state of change, when everything has been changing around us, I think it's a reminder that that is a unique power that we can bring into this moment, is that truth that, nothing is certain, but that's okay. Anything is possible. And, uncertainty brings opportunity as well. And you just have to trust yourself to be able to navigate that change. Something really struck out at me that you said, which was the idea of, you're always selling yourself to other people. You're also selling yourself to yourself, that you're constantly telling yourself a story about what you're doing and what life you're living in the moment as you're living it. And I think that is such a powerful thing to remember and to be really conscious of, that it's not an unconscious narrative that's based on that you might accidentally be telling yourself a story based on how well you're holding up to someone else's story, right? I think that we get stuck in those traps, and that's sort of what I was getting at with the idea of, the rules changing and the milestones changing, that and I think that's a really interesting way of putting it, is that the story of what this moment looks like, what your life has looked like to this point, and what your life will look like in the future, it can't just be, well, how closely have I followed someone else's story? It's what is mine, and what does success look like to me, what's important to me. And the kinder we can be to ourselves as we tell those stories, the better, because it's very easy for that narrative to become judgmental, right? Why haven't
Well,
you done this yet? Why haven't you done that yet? Why are you wasting time? Why are you taking time for deep work instead of jumping in and getting this thing started, right? It's very easy for us to slip into a judgmental narrative, and it does us no service.
one of those pieces is your own, like when you say like other people's narratives and then your own, well, there's this weird one which is like your own 18-year-old's narrative, like your own or 25-year-old's narrative, or like building away from what you believed you should be and asking yourself if you're doing things because you're not there and you're just like giving up that push, like, well, how do I continue down that path versus like, no, I've actually reframed what I think and I actually want some different things, is like something that everybody at some point goes through. And I might be going through it way too late. Some people might have, I talked to my wife about this, and I think for her, it was like in her early 30s. And I think kids like really changed it for her right off the bat. So she was like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, this stuff hit her differently and she adjusted what mattered to her.
Yeah, interesting.
I think for me, that's happening more now. And I'm having to I love the idealism. I love the concept of problem solving for the world. I love the purpose driven orient portion. But I also am like, where are you going to put your feet? Like, what stuff is stable and what stuff are you open to changing? The stable part has to be somewhere in what I've learned over the past bunch of years as I want to reframe whatever's going on going forward. And it's a really weird, I mean, I don't think I even said that right, but it's like, what do I really want to build if I don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore, including my 18-year-old self? It's like, start exploring all these different inputs, these different environments, these different things that give me more passion and energy now, and the things that I'm going to like now that'll actually affect how I live 40, 50, 60 a little bit more. And I have to go through that change. And a lot of people want you to be the same. They lock you into those inputs. They lock you into the way you live your life. That's very difficult to make that change in the middle of having kids, in the middle of a relationship, in the middle of how you do business, in the middle of what people expect of you. And yet I know that the people who've done it, and you see it, there's something consistent thread in them. There's like, oh, that's who they really are. That's awesome. And always, that's the people I'm most impressed with,
Mm.
you know?
Totally. I think there's something in there that you said around the stability of knowing who you are, right? And that I think that's a really powerful thing for everyone to think about who feels like they're going through this phase, that we can't look externally for stability really in the way that perhaps, and I don't want to like mythologize what the past was like. There are all kinds of problems previous generations dealt with too. So it's, we're every generation goes through their own shit, right? But I mean, we've seen some change in the world, right? And we can anticipate that the world will continue to change. And so, you were just hitting a point where you can't find that sense of stability and groundedness externally. You have to create it internally. You have to just know who you are, what you want to do, what a good life means to you, and what you want to live like, and feel like this inner stability, that's what will guide you forward, not what's happening around you. And obviously you will work to create the conditions around you to achieve the other things that you want to achieve. And you know and let's not kid ourselves, I can feel true to myself and very stable, but if I don't have money in my bank account, I'm not eating, and that's a problem. So
Totally.
it's not just vibes, but that is a big piece of it, is that holding yourself out to what these external factors are is just it's probably never been a recipe for success, but it's only becoming more diminishing in its returns, as the world just becomes more and more different.
AJ, what I admire so much about you and some of the stuff I've read and what you're even doing here with the podcast, I feel like you've done this thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to not attack the change. I am going to process it, take time with it, communicate it, write it, and I'm going to give the chance to do a bunch of things, but like for almost like undo, like by processing and grieving, but also like just taking the time to think about it. It's not even, it doesn't have to be with an emotional attachment to it. It's just you get the chance to allow change to happen while staying in whatever the new path is, which is a very uncertain path. It doesn't have goals in the same way. Like we are both goal oriented people. We both drove on a lot of goals, and a lot of people who know us are like, you could achieve anything you say you're going to achieve because look at you, you're doing it. And that was nice. And now it's like, yeah, maybe that's true. But like what I haven't done is just take enough time to experience or to settle in and not attack change. I'm somebody who, when there's something, when the dynamic shifts, when there's a moment shift, like even in my own company, you show up and you're like, okay, here's the market, here's this is happening. What do we think about this? How do we approach this now? Sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing,
Mm-hmm.
does not come naturally to me. And that version of it all, of taking the moment and taking the time and being okay, being uncomfortable, being comfortable, being uncomfortable with whatever the change is. And it's different for everybody. Like that's mine.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else watching this or listening to this, it might actually be, I never make the decision. I stay, I don't do anything different, and I'm complacent or whatever, and I need
Right.
to choose that. But undoing the things that lead to that same pattern, you start seeing the pattern. My pattern is there's a change. I will make it. I will go after it, and I'm going to attack it. And at this point, this is the first time where I'm like, I don't want to take the responsibility on of attacking a change and then having to follow that trajectory because I've attacked it. I am going to take the time to say, there is change, and I need to undo a lot of habits underneath that lead me to always wanting to attack the next thing and needing that goal and needing that piece. And I instead want to settle here and just go, what brings me a different kind of energy and happiness as I go through this moment? And I think you found it in writing, and you found it in communicating this stuff, and you found it in the different type of contracts you're taking and what you're doing. And you still have to manage your life. Like, it's not like you get to do this in some beautiful, it's like you're doing this with all the regular life happening. I love the concept of it. I struggle with the execution of it. And that is my full barometer of that's why I need to do it.
100%. I appreciate all your kind words on this. I think it's, I think that it was a huge struggle for me last year when, I wouldn't have chosen to step back the way that I did. And for those who don't know, I had sort of an abrupt ending with my work that gave me time, suddenly gave me a lot of time, and it was unexpected. And I think that it was a sense of it was a sense of just needing to unlearn, to recover, to come out of this phase of life that I didn't realize was taking as much as it was until it stopped, and suddenly just felt this energy shift. But to your point, like, I've always been a person who's just, okay, what's the next problem to solve? What's the next thing? I'm a helper, right? I want to give to others. I want to solve problems for people. And this was the first moment. I had a lot of people say this to me in that moment, was like, it's time for you to take, and like, not take from others, but take for yourself. It's time for you to stop worrying about anyone but just you and who you want to be, and go figure that out. And it was really weird and uncomfortable and so powerful. And I'm so grateful for the chance to have done it. And I'm so grateful for the strength that I found to do it the way I wanted to do it. But I had to, because at our core, we're all planners, you and I, and folks like us. What I said to myself was, I'm giving myself, it was January, I said, I'm giving myself to September, and I'm not doing anything other than following wherever my gut takes me, pursuing whatever feels like I need to pursue, and just really figuring out how to listen to myself again, because there had been a lot of noise in my world for the last almost 20 years, right? And I was, I could listen to what my gut was telling me to do in terms of like where I wanted to work and how I want, but just like, really, like, who am I? That's a whole other level of conversation you're having internally. And I had to tell myself, though, that like, I had to draw a line in the sand for myself, because I think that when you are such a, just such a person driven to do things, you very quickly feel like, okay, but what's next? I'm wasting my time. I'm doing this. And so by saying like, September, I will know, and then I will start to do again, and really intentionally be like, and until then, I'm just going to ride the wave of whatever this is, and just kind of like surrender to where it takes me.
You
It
had
was a
that abrupt moment. Did like having kids also adjust how you perceive all of that? Because for sure for me, there's been a new goal in mind, I
Oh,
guess.
yeah.
Yeah.
I remember having this, like, it's funny to hear what you said about your wife, and the reflection she went through when she had kids. I definitely went through something similar with my daughter, who's my oldest. When I had her, I was building my first startup. It was still very scrappy and small, and we had a couple employees, and I had a co-founder, but it was like my whole world. And I was still very deep in the like rise and grind mindset, in the, I'm going to be a woman who does it all, and motherhood was very much like, yeah, okay, I know I want to be a mother. I know I want to have a family. This is, something on my to-do list. I'm going to go check it off, and then, get back to work and not let it lose my stride, right? And so I was very into that sense of my identity, and then I had my daughter, and it was like, I don't want to do shit. Like, I don't want to do any of this. I want to sit and stare at her all day and make sure she's fed and figure out how to get her to sleep. And like, it was such a shift. I had never experienced that before. And it was so, and there were all these talking about the story you tell yourself, and the external stories. Like, there's so much external story that I was telling myself about the kind of woman I needed to be, and all this stuff. And like, it's not like my desire to work went away, obviously. Like, I've done that, but it was just like this really big like shift moment of being like, whoa, there's this whole other side of me that I didn't know I had, I didn't know I wanted. It made me question a lot of the things I thought I believed about what success looked like and just how I wanted to live my life. And like, it faded a little bit because you hit a point where you're like, I got to get out of this house and go back to work because these kids are driving me crazy. But like, it was a big, yeah, it was definitely a big turning point of being like, whoa, okay, there's something else here that I need to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I see it. I see it in a lot of people. That's why I asked. And I guess when I'm thinking about it, like my goal, one of the things that started changing in my goals was, and so I didn't have an abrupt ending in my situation. If anything, I was like I just watched a downward decline of a market, how hard it was. Like, we had COVID, and on one hand it went down, and then all of a sudden it went up, and then another time it's going down, and you're dealing with those shifts, and you're dealing
Oh,
with
yeah.
people in your company and the responsibility of driving, and having to think all that. Well, at the same time, I was showing up at my house, and watching my kids. I was lucky. COVID, I got to watch my eldest. I was in the house when my eldest learned to walk. It's like like I was there for good moments, which is amazing. But it started shifting that like my patience and my irritation, all my patience was being used at work, and
Mhm.
all my irritation was coming at home. And it wasn't that I wasn't a great dad and being there and supportive and doing all these things. If anything, like the modern relationship, the 50-50 situation. But, and let's be honest, my wife's listening. It's not 50-50. I just want to be really clear. Even if I made my day 50-50, it wouldn't be 50-50 in just the way
Yeah.
it is. Um, but that was a very different dynamic in that it wasn't about, hey, how much am I doing? It was about how much can I sit and just be patient when my kids are not in the best headspace or things are not going well or whatever. And like, I don't want to show up at home and be impatient. I don't want, that part became a much bigger goal. And it was like, oh, how do I balance that goal with whatever I want to still achieve and still work on? And I still want to solve problems and I still want to do things. And then the balance between all that came, shit, well, I guess I have to figure out how to work on myself, which is now a third tier of
Mm.
where I have to find patience and space and time, is like working on myself to get to a good place so I can be good for my kids while still managing this other thing. And how do I craft this whole thing? Oh, okay. However you've lived your life up until now, that is incompatible with what you are approaching and what you are thinking about. And if you keep trying to do that, you will die at 60 because you'll have that heart attack.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of people, it started helping me understand like where different stresses of adults have come over time, which I think in my youth, I was just like, I'm just not going to be that. Like, I'm going to live my life, in a different way and figure it out different. And like, I built a lot of different paths. And yet when I started hitting that stress, I was angry at myself. I was like, oh man, like, have you just failed that life you were trying to construct? And instead it was like, oh, there's a lot of things that no matter how forward you think you were, no matter how much you thought you understood people of different eras or times or years or ages or whatever, there's this natural change that you now see for you personally, what doesn't work. And now my kids, and they're having a dad who can just be there and show up at his absolute best, is like a primary portion of my goals that I just didn't think that would be my problem. I never thought I would be impatient because I'm
Mm.
so patient in so many places.
Mhm.
That was
Yeah.
where I reached my limit.
I think there's a whole other conversation here to dig into, which we won't today because we don't have the time, but around learning emotional regulation as you get older, right? And that, when your plate is like when your plate's a little less full, perhaps with different things and different stressors, either you can manage things differently, or who you express your frustrations to don't feel quite as heavy in how much they matter or consequential, perhaps. And as you get older, you're carrying more stress, you're carrying more responsibility. If you have kids, you're carrying dependence, who you're shaping actively and how you show up. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to snap at my friend and then I'm going to call them up later and be like, yo, sorry, I was a jerk, right? Like, it's different when you're impatient with kids or when you overreact with kids. And so there's this thing. And I think that, again, something unique, it seems, with our generation in this moment, it's like There's the saying, if you're a millennial, there's two kinds of millennials, those who are in therapy and those who haven't started therapy yet, right? and but I mean, I think this is the kind of stuff that it's like we're
So
actually
depressing.
talking about these things. We're actually talking about that stuff and live to it. I don't know that, my father's generation, or certainly not his father's generation, would come home with the self-awareness that it's like, you know what, I am displacing my frustration from work onto my children, and that's an unhealthy way to manage my feelings, and I need to do something about it. That is a mature thing to recognize, even if it's a struggle to deal with. I think that is a really powerful thing that we have the opportunity to work on at this stage of life, that will have a profound impact, on ourselves, on how we move through the world, and handle our feelings when things get tough at home, or also at work, also in lots of different environments. And yeah, and it has a huge impact on us, and it has a huge impact on everyone else around us, including younger generations, right? Jeremy, I super appreciate this whole conversation. I have one question left, but the final question that I like to ask everyone. So we're often asked, what would be a piece of advice you would give to your younger self? But since this is all about forward planning for the next 40 years, what would be a piece of advice you would like your future self to listen to?
I'd probably tell myself that at any given time, I believe that impending change is faster than it actually is. That the kind of thing I'm addressing can be addressed faster than I think it will be. And that just because it won't be that fast doesn't mean it won't change. And doesn't mean it won't adjust. And I guess I give myself that advice because I think there's always a clock in the head, and I'm sure as I get older, that clock will feel like it's more imminent. But in order for me to be okay with that clock, I need to not be thinking about how I have to squeeze something in before the end, and that if I want to change, it will happen, and that time will present itself. And when it doesn't, it won't, and I can't control that anyways. But the idea of racing against a clock or thinking about age in that linear way has some very downward versions. And I think at 40, that's the part that I've seen from here, and I think will be very relevant for when I'm older to constantly remind myself.
I love that. Let time unfold on its own time. And trust that wherever you're going, you'll get there when you're supposed to get there. And if not, maybe that wasn't the destination, right?
And because you don't know the end, don't assume that you do. Don't assume the end is nigh, but it's like live your life for the moment, but also don't assume the end is right here. And I think that balance is going to be, it's a very hard balance to maintain. So it would be something I probably have to repeat every year.
There you go. Well, I'll snippet this part of our podcast and send it to you as a voice memo every so often, so that you just remember it all the time.
Thanks.
Jeremy, I really appreciate you taking the time with me today. This has been an awesome conversation, and I think we touched on some really great stuff. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the next journey that you go on.
Thank you. I love this, and I'm glad I just started therapy as a millennial.
Awesome. All right, take care. All right, that's our show. Thank you again to our sponsor, Habit Coffee Club. If you haven't tried their coffee or signed up for a subscription, what are you waiting for? Visit www.habitcoffeeclub.com and use promo code midpoint at checkout for 20% off your first purchase. That's it for our show today. We'll see you guys next week.